Welcome back once again, and this time we are doing part 10 of the OC story that you guys and my Patreons, everyone in the comments has helped me to create, and while I am improvising and telling you this story, I've been giving you things to vote on, and you guys have been voting for all the different things, and I've been using that to weave a little bit of the narrative. Alright, let's pick up where we left off in part 9, and what did you guys vote for? And the grand reveal of what the Patreons voted for last week. We pick up in a misty woodland halfway up a hill. The two characters, Erasmus the prince and Darrow the assassin, have just climbed out of a sewer system, escaping a city where Maximus, an old enemy, and his gang have been searching for them. Darrow is recovering from his injuries, and Prince Erasmus has been trying to learn how to fight. They stepped quietly and carefully out of the sewer system into the trees, and as they looked around them and set up their camp for the night, carefully obscuring the flames from anyone around them, a woman stepped towards them. The woman walked towards them as though her feet didn't really touch the ground. She flowed through the grass, the garment she wore woven of leaves and grass and brushes and trees, and little remnants from insects, a wing here, a sting there. She looked so natural she could blend in with their surroundings. But her eyes were bright and pale blue, and exactly the same size, shape, and colour as Darrow's. There was a beat. Silence. The footsteps drew closer, and stopped on the other side of their campfire. The smoke rising up from it combining with the mist dropping low around them in the dark. Erasmus glanced from the woman to Darrow and back again, hands clutched on his own knees. He was nervous and he couldn't quite place why. He was certain, however, that he knew who this woman must be. His brain recollected back all the way to the stories, few that they were, that Darrow had told him of his mother. His Fae mother. His Fae mother who loved to wander and wander and wander. Who loved to wander the world more so than she loved her own son. Darrow had said he didn't hold it against her. It was part of her nature. He liked to wander too. He felt the pull on occasion, but knew that while it was only half in his blood, it was fully in his mother's. He could not imagine what it felt like to be truly pulled in so many directions all at once. So many directions that you would leave your own child and go following the call. He forgave her a long time ago, but he tried not to think of her ever since. Still they sat in silence. Darrow's eyes, the same ones as the woman's, staring up at her from where he sat. His arms slowly shifted to fold across his chest, and while his eyes did not narrow, they were not wide with shock, horror, surprise, or relief. There was no emotion at all there. He simply looked at his mother. He didn't speak. His lips were so tight pressed together they were going pale, and Erasmus realised that Darrow had no intention of saying anything at all. He decided he wasn't exactly in a place to comment. His two older brothers had never really been close to him, his relationship with his father had been laughable, and he had never known his own mother. He had no clue and no right and no authority to claim how someone should behave in a situation like this. He tried to remember how long it had been. Darrow's life would be longer than his own, of course, but how many years? How many years since that child had been left? It must be over 20. Darrow had certainly changed. Did his mother recognize him? That question brought the prince's eyes back to the woman in front of them. The Fae woman standing tall, no, not standing, floating. Drifting on a sea of grass as though she blended into the forest and the night all at once. Her face was almost unreadable. She looked down at the two of them, but she did not seem surprised to see them. And slowly, very slowly, it dawned upon Erasmus that perhaps this woman had known they were here all along. He had read stories of the Fae over the years. They had ways of tracking their own kind, ways of following their own kin, like a scent, like a wolf on a hunt, but nicer, more magical. He'd always imagined it to be like following starlight. Starlight made him think of Darrow. Starlight made him think of Darrow's eyes, of Darrow's smile, the way he literally lit up when he was happy, the way the prince had only seen that recently. He had not asked about it. He'd not asked about the scars yet on Darrow's back. He'd not mentioned the glittering to his blood, or the glistening, shining around him that happened when he smiled properly. A proper, real smile, a happy smile. A smile the prince was only too delighted he could get the man to make. He wondered idly if this was a part of his Fae heritage, but looking at the woman before them now, still unspeaking, unmoving as she hung there in the air, the prince decided, no. That starlight, that shining love, that could not come from this woman. Not that she was incapable of it, but that her love seemed different, wandering, free. Perhaps she was the reason that Darrow's hair ran with the wind whenever he moved. She was the reason that he moved around so much. She was the reason that his heart beat so fast whenever he was on the road. But she could not be the reason that he literally sparkled to life when he was happy. He remembered then about Darrow's father, the man he had never met. Celestial was the word Darrow had used. The prince began to wonder again. But as the silence drew on around the campfire, he decided that wandering was not the time and the place for right now. So he broke the silence and spoke. Every part of his royal upbringing was screaming at him to greet the newcomer, to offer her food, offer her shelter, ask her name. But it was Darrow, always Darrow, that the prince turned to first. He looked at the man beside him, still staring up at the woman, and he asked him, "Do you want her to stay?" The assassin shrugged, slowly, non-committally, and the prince could tell that the assassin had not made up his own mind about the subject yet. Softly, Erasmus moved his hand, resting it just on the side of Darrow's knee. The assassin didn't unclench his own arms, but something in him seemed to shift just a little, relaxing ever so slightly by an inch or so. Still, though, those pale blue eyes stared upwards, lacking all emotion as he looked at his mother. Erasmus nodded softly. "All right then. Well," turning to the woman, he asked, "Would you like to join us? Sit, perhaps? Over there?" He indicated with his hands, gesturing to the other side of the fire where she stood. There was a log that could be sat down upon. He didn't want her too close to Darrow just yet. He couldn't say or think why, but he just knew. The woman nodded in turn, and gently, gracefully lowered herself down to sit on the log. At least it looked like she was sitting. It looked for all the world as if she was sitting. But still she didn't quite touch it. As though again she was floating, hovering just above it. Perhaps not to disturb any resident insects or vines and ivy that grew upon it. The prince thought, desperate for anything to say, but decided that candor was probably the best course of action, for Darrow if nothing else. So he asked the question he knew had been on Darrow's mind ever since he first laid eyes on the woman, the one that was creeping into his own mind too. Looking through the fire at the woman, he asked her, "Did you find us by coincidence, or was this a planned visit?" The woman smiled. It wasn't unkind, but it was uncanny in a way. It didn't quite reach her eyes. Not the way Darrow's lit up when he smiled a true smile. She raised an eyebrow to Prince Erasmus, and then turned her gaze to her son. She spoke to him in a language the prince did not understand. It sounded something like falling leaves. She said only 3 words, and Darrow scowled at her. She spoke again, more words tumbling over and under each other like a rushing of wind and leaves in the trees. Her hands were animated, but her voice was steady. She was gesturing up and down at her son, touching her hair, waving at his eyes, looking down at his shoes, the tips of his ears. And Darrow sat there, watching, scowling, listening. He didn't nod, he didn't pull back, he didn't shake his head, he didn't uncross his arms. It carried on like a torrent, word after word, leaves in the trees brushing over and around him like a symphony, as the mist continued to close in around them as the dark of night unfurled completely, its cape surrounding them. They could not see stars in the skies through the branches of the trees that closed in around them, like their own pocket dimension hidden in the world. For half an hour it continued, Erasmus watching through the flames as this woman animatedly spoke to her son, her voice still steady and her hands waving up and down, looking at him up and down, and Darrow staring back at her through the flames. The prince had no idea what was being said, but when Darrow finally spoke, the tone was enough to understand. Yelane Shallowin. That made the woman stop. Her voice died in her throat, and she sat back, the hands once so animated falling still in her lap. She gazed through the flames, and then looked to Erasmus. And then she spoke in the common tongue, and it was to the prince that she said the following words.
I caught my son's scent a while ago and came looking for him. I wish to inform him that his father has decided to pay your mortal world a visit, and he may well come to say hello. I didn't think he would be receptive to that, and given how receptive he is to me, I believe I was correct.
She turned back to her son then, rising from her seat until she was hovering just a touch above the blades of grass at her feet.
I'm glad to see you've grown up well, my son. I knew you had no need of me.
She leaned in closer, coming around the edge of the fire now, and she whispered in the common tongue, not trying, perhaps, to make the prince not hear her. And the last word she said to her son before she swirled away into the dark with ease.
When the leaf of the cedar tree falls, it is quite a beautiful thing. I hope you can preserve yours.
And with that, she was gone. She disappeared as fast as she had come, into the black, swirling night, through the mist and away. And Darrow's arms took a long time to unfold from his chest, as he sat, staring into the fire, deliberately not looking after her, breathing slow, long breaths. The prince sat, watching him, then looking to the fire, then looking back to Darrow. He tried to think of something to say, but Darrow didn't need comforting. That wasn't what he sought, and the prince wasn't sure what he did need in that moment. Reassurance, perhaps? No. He did not need that. What could it be? Erasmus. Darrow spoke, suddenly, many hours later, and the prince jumped, startled, having half fallen asleep, head tilted into his hands, staring into the fire. He blinked, rubbing dark eyes as he stared at the assassin. Yes, Darrow. What is it? A finger beckoned, just one, from where the assassin sat. Come here, he asked. And of course the prince did. He shuffled over and was by Darrow's side in an instant, arms not quite sure what to do. And then, at the look on Darrow's face, he slowly snaked one arm around the assassin's shoulders, hugging him in close. And as fair hair slowly dropped against the prince's cheek, he knew that this was the thing to do, what Darrow had been asking for. just closeness. Someone, finally, somewhere in the world, who wanted to be near him. They stayed like that the rest of the night, watching the fire flicker on and on. Occasionally, one of them would reach over to add more kindling to it, but they let it die out as the sun dawned in the distance. They ate their way through the scraps of food they had, saving some for later, and then they set off. They could tell roughly which direction they had come from, and so they headed another one, vaguely towards the castle where the prince's brothers would be, but not completely just yet. They had an outline of a plan, an idea: become a criminal for the prince, and find out who had really tried to assassinate his brothers and his father, find out who had sent Darrow. To do that, they would need to go to the castle, they decided. But that could wait just a little while longer. And it would certainly take a long time to walk. And in the meantime, they needed other things. Other things that neither of them could really name, but they just wanted. While the prince did want answers, he didn't need them now. Eventually, yes, but not right this second. And as he walked side by side with Darrow, he felt more and more that even if the answers never came, he could still be very satisfied with the way his life had turned out. Ironic, really. He spoke about this just a little, the irony of how his life had really begun when someone had tried to take it, and Darrow shot back a small barb about how it was strange that it had been he and not the prince who had tried. And they both laughed, that dark, manic laughter that can only be shared by people who have been right to the very edge of the brink, looked over, and nearly fallen down. It brought a softness to them, that shared dark joy, because they had not fallen down. They'd both pulled back from the very edge, sometimes pulled each other back, and that knowledge, that kinship, that understanding, it bonded them tighter than anything else ever could have in that moment, and it made their smiles even brighter and wider. For 3 months they travelled like that, through this thick, thick woodland. It just seemed to go on and on forever. The mist hung low around them, and it glistened softly any time it caught a patch of sunlight. They built rough structures to sleep under when it rained, and camped out under the starry night sky high up in the trees whenever it was warm. And they just kept going. Darrow could hunt, and he taught the prince how to do so. They caught food, they found berries, occasionally they even cooked over campfires. And as life slowly moved on, they became even more comfortable around each other. And then, one day, came the question. They had come at last to a clearing of sorts. The trees were so dense here that if they ever branched out for more than a foot on either side, it could be considered a clearing. But this little glade was, while being shadowed over by branches, much less dense than the areas around it. There were thick, streaming willow trees dangling down, and a little rush of water trickling and then running faster and faster until the stream opened out into a waterfall that spilled down into a hollow. In the fast dawning light, it was beautiful, the water near crystal clear, and the pair realized just how filthy they were. They decided to bathe. No one else was around them for miles, so they laid their few possessions down, stripped off, and dived into the water. The water was cool, but not cold. All the same, it was bracing in the early morning light, and the pair stuck close together. For warmth, of course, they would say if anyone had asked. Though it wasn't really that. They began to scrub their arms, their legs, their hands, their faces, and as Erasmus pulled himself out of the water, He caught a glimpse of Darrow. The assassin had his back half turned to him, hands dragging knots out of his hair. The prince smiled a small laugh and called to Darrow, "Would you like help?" The assassin turned, nodding glumly, one hand half stuck in a knot in his own hair. The prince, still smiling, slid through the water towards him, and standing behind the assassin, began to slowly trail his fingers through the long, pale hair. The prince worked slowly, methodically, gentle, delicate fingertips tracing lines down through the fine, pale hair over and over as he eased and coaxed at every knot, nudging it out of place until the hair fell in gentle, soft waves around him, swimming through the water as it pooled around Darrow's head. The assassin had slowly sunk deeper and deeper until he was shoulder deep in the water, sitting leaning against the prince. His eyes had fluttered closed, and he sat so peacefully, so calm, so quiet, a comforting warm weight against the prince's chest. And though he could find no more knots to untangle, he didn't stop brushing the assassin's hair. He couldn't bring himself to. This moment felt too precious to lose, too precious to waste, too precious to stop. And then his thumb caught something. His hands brushed down, down, through the water, through the hair, and they came to rest on the assassin's shoulders. A gentle, soft sort of massage as he ran his thumbs, and that's when he found it. The jagged scars, the gnarled, old-looking ones that had sat there on the assassin's back, and sat in the back of the prince's mind for so long. He hadn't asked, but something told him he should now. So he did. He gave voice to the question that had plagued him for so long, quietly eating away in the very back of his mind. The prince asked, "Darrow, how did you get these scars?" The assassin, still with his eyes closed, head tipped all the way back now, pressing backwards against Erasmus's shoulder, said with a small grin, "You gotta be more specific than that. I've got a fuck ton. Which ones?" These on your back, on your shoulders, Darrow. The biggest ones you have, they look nasty. What happened to you?" Pale eyes opened, staring straight up at the prince, and for a moment he thought he had stepped too far. For a moment he was sure he had done something wrong, asked too much. But the eyes were not full of hate, full of bile, full of anger, full of anything other than confusion. Darrow blinked. "I don't have any scars on my shoulders." "What do you mean?" "Darrow, they're right here. They're under my hands right now. They're old, Darrow. They're huge." "Where?" "Well, I cannot exactly show you, but here. May I?" "Yeah, touch it. Do what you want." "What?" And so the prince showed him, as best he could. His hands started at Darrow's spine, running up over the scars, over and across his bones and his skin onto his shoulders where they sat, jagged and nasty. "I don't understand. I've never done nothing on my back like that. Been stabbed a few times, sure, swiped at, but nothing what would ever do that." "They match, almost, Darrow. They are almost the same on both sides. Near perfectly symmetrical." Oh, I'm fucking confused.
"You really did not know they were there?"
No, of course I didn't. I mean, don't really look at my back very often, do I? But I'd have noticed if something like that happened.
I do not understand. Where could they have come from?"
Fuck, you got me. When did you notice them? Just now?
I actually, I noticed them a few months ago. I just, I didn't want to
pry, so... Oh, you're cute. You think I'm cute? Oh, not this again. You know I think you're fucking pretty. You know I think you're gorgeous. Stop it now. This is serious. I've got scars on my back I never knew I had. The fuck is going on? Do you think possibly your mother would know? Nah, why would she know? I didn't have them when I was a little kid. Or at least no one told me I did. I'm sure they would have done. Right? People care about kids and shit. Yes. Enough to tell them if they were scarred or notice if it happened, I suppose, yes. Well, then I'm all out of ideas. All I know is I've never been passed out long enough for something like this to have happened without me noticing. And I've definitely never noticed it happening, so, yeah. Well, that leaves us with another mystery to add to our pile, I suppose. Well, I think yours is a bit more pressing, isn't it, gorgeous? You speak to me so sweetly, Darrow. Yeah, I'm trying to distract you from our second mystery. I still want to find out what happened to you. Yeah, but like, you know, clearing your name and finding out what happened to your dad, that's kind of more pressing, don't you reckon? I suppose so, yes. But don't think I'm dropping this. No, I wouldn't expect you to. Hell, I am interested. Fuck. It's fascinating. But, alright. Like you said, add it to the pile, right? Alright. Consider it added to the pile. They continued to wonder about it. They pulled themselves out of the water and laid down on the grass to dry out in the sun. It was warm now, warming the mists in the world around them, still so full of trees. They decided to set up camp in that little clearing for a few days, and after some hours of lying there, basking in the sun, getting dry, they put some clothes on and set to work. They built up a fire, set up a shelter, a place to sleep, checked around, looked at the weather. It didn't seem to be on the verge of raining. So they sat out in the open as the afternoon wore on. It was companionable silence for a while, sometimes joking, laughing. And then, quite suddenly, Darrow noticed something. Why are you laughing? Erasmus, why are you laughing? I am not laughing at you. You are laughing at me. What? What is it? Have I got berries around my mouth? What is it? It's your hair, Darrow. My hair? Why? Well, it's dry now, you see, and, oh, fuck off. It doesn't look bad. It's frizzy, isn't it? The assassin ran hands through his own hair, desperately pawing at it, trying to straighten it down, but it only made things worse. The pale hair, having been completely unknotted by the prince, had now dried and was sitting like a bird's nest around his head. Oh, fuck-a-doodle-doo. I look ridiculous. Stop laughing! I can help if you like. Do it. Do whatever you want. Just stop this. The assassin waved a hand, gesturing around his own head. Come here. Let me help. Erasmus moved in closer, hooking both legs around Darrow from behind as he began braiding the long, pale hair. It was soothing, Darrow realised. Nice, even. Comfortable and comforting. Having that touch. A touch he didn't shy from. A touch that wasn't a fight, or an initiation to a fight, or the end of a fight, or just a punch. A touch that he could trust. A touch that over the 4 or so months he had grown to know the prince had come to mean more to him than anything in the entire world. He thought back to what his mother had said to him, and he realised that at some point he should probably tell the prince what that meant. Not yet, though. Not for a long time. That was something that meant I love you. And he couldn't say that yet. He could see it glistening somehow in the future if things carried on the way they were going. Just not yet. But it was a very comfortable thought to know that in another few months, if everything was still just the way it was, if his feelings had stayed the same, or he suspected grown further, then it would be something he could say. Something he could say and mean. And then he would explain what a cedar leaf meant to him. They had not discussed his father. Darrow had been very deliberate about that. Plus, there really wasn't anything to say. He'd never known the man, never met the man, didn't even know his name, could not have picked him out of a lineup, would not have recognised him if he had had a lifetime to look for the man, and he had no interest in it. His only plan, really, was that should he show up, he would get sent away immediately. Darrow had no need for him, just as he had no need for his mother. He had no need for any of it, but what he really meant was that he had no want for it. He had to learn not to need them, and eventually over time it had flitted away, and he no longer wanted them either. And one of the beautiful things about Erasmus, Darrow realised, as he sat there slowly having his hair braided, was that Erasmus took that without question, and understood. He didn't try to push him back into the arms of his mother, didn't try to tell him that you only have one parent, only one family, only one this, that, or the other, and you should give them a chance because they're blood. It's family. He did not say any of that. And Darrow found himself so grateful for this that he smiled again. And gently he began to glow, an illumination he did not notice, but the prince did. Darrow? It was, of course, the day for asking these questions. Why not add another? Darrow? The voice came soft from behind him, waking Darrow from his thoughts. The assassin reached around to press a hand gently against the prince's cheek as he turned, apologising. Sorry, beautiful, I was miles away. What did you say? Darrow, can I ask, do you know that you are glowing? What? Right now. When you smile at me like that, it illuminates you. That's a weird kind of a compliment, but I'll take it. No, Darrow, I mean literally. You are glowing. What? Look. The prince raised Darrow's hand, and as the assassin looked, he saw, to his horror, he was glowing. Not bright like a sun or a star, faded enough that it only just was noticeable if you were close to him, but he was nonetheless shining. Pale eyes grew wide. This was a day, it turned out, of surprises. The prince could tell at once that Darrow had clearly no idea. Well, I suppose that answers my next question of why and how it happens. Yeah. Darrow's voice tremored just a little. It wasn't that it was scary, but it was new information, and his mind ran back to his job, and how, if he started glowing like this, his assassinationing days may be long behind him. So, this happens a lot? No, only when you smile. When I smile? Properly smile. When you're really, really happy. When you are happy. It happened when you were playing the violin. It happens sometimes when you're smiling at me. I hadn't seen it before then. I think it is just when you are. When I'm happy. Well, the assassin decided the best course of action was possibly to make a joke out of it. I mean, I had never been properly happy before I met you, so I guess that explains why no one else noticed. I will take that compliment until my dying breath, Darrow. Yeah, alright, you're welcome. Stop it, stop smiling at me like that. Fuck. No, wait, Darrow, I'm ticklish, no! And they fell together into a pile of leaves and laughter. And that's where we'll leave them for today. They've got many plans to make, many questions to answer, But now we've got a question for you. A vote. What would you like to happen next? There is going to be absolutely none of our usual all of the above. This is a fork in the road and a decision must be made. Would we like Prince Erasmus and Darrow to continue through the woods and make it to an old, abandoned, or so they seem, castle ruin? Or option number 2, would we like them to continue through the woods and find a civilization of potentially friendly creatures? You can only pick one. There is no all of the above. Option 1, Spooky Wookie Castle. Option 2, creatures. Pick your selection in the comments down below, and I will see you in part 11. Thank you, as always, for joining in with this crazy, chaotic content. I hope you are enjoying. I am still experimenting with the audio, so it's not quite there yet, but thank you for bearing with me. I love you all. Bye-bye.